Good afternoon. Is that there? Okay. Good afternoon. Wow, good. All right. So an interesting experience to be up here and looking down at you. So we are obviously videotaping this session, so one thing is please speak loudly, and if we do get questions from you or comments, we will try to repeat them back so that they can be heard on the video. My name is Dr. Toni Tollerud. I'm a professor at Northern Illinois University, and my colleague with me this afternoon, who's presenting with me, is Rochelle Cripe. Rochelle is a master's student in our program, and we are here this afternoon to talk to you about going beyond GSAs. Who all knows what a GSA is? Who doesn't know what a GSA is? All right, so a GSA, what does that stand for? Who is it? The Gay Straight Alliance. So if you don't know that, you're in for some really good information this afternoon, I think, in terms of what we want to offer to you. It's always interesting to talk about a topic like this because there's such a wide disparity of what people know in an audience. We're kind of taking this from the elementary level, I would say, today. So, but we hope that everyone will leave here with either some new resources or some new ideas. How many of you are school counselors? So that's the majority. And when I think about school counselors, working with GLBT, and that stands for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, or transsexual youth, we have to think about those students that come into our schools and identify, and there are other acronyms that get talked about there too, and I know Rochelle's going to talk about those in terms of questioning, asexual, queer, intersex, and ally. And that last one is what we hope all of you today will leave as allies in this quest to serve GLBT students to the best of our abilities. How many of you have worked with a gay or lesbian student? Raise your hand. Excellent. How many of you have worked with a bisexual student? Raise your hand. How many of you have worked with a transgendered student? So still quite a few, and that's really becoming much more common in our schools today, and might be why you're here today. So welcome. We hope we can answer some of your questions, and Rochelle's going to take it away.
Okay, I would like to introduce myself. As Toni said, I am Rochelle Cripe, and I am a master's student at Northern Illinois University. And I identify as a straight ally. I have been on a personal journey myself that started probably about 15 years ago when my sister came out to me. At that point, I began to realize that, oh, there are other people in the world who have different beliefs than maybe I do, or different ideas or different identities than I have. But at that point, I knew that I loved my sister, I respected her, I wanted to accept her to the fullest. So I began my journey as a personal ally at that point, and when I got into the master's program, I began to learn more about what LGBT people, is there a tinny echo? Okay. I began to learn more about what LGBT people face as they go into the workplace, and you know how transgender people sometimes have problems finding the restrooms, or a restroom that's suitable or appropriate for them or comfortable for them to use. So I just began to learn about some of the challenges that some people face, and I began to think about the schools, about how our youth in the schools working with these terrible kind of difficult issues at such a young age. Not that being LGBT is terrible, it's just that there's a lot of kind of issues that go along with it, and developmentally, if they're at a young age, they just need some extra support. So that's what started this for me. And the title I just wanted to mention, Going Beyond GSAs, I want to say that GSAs are a very, very wonderful thing. If you don't have any resources or support in your school, they're a great, great place to start. But this presentation was born of ideas for things that you could add on to after you have started your own GSA. Or if you cannot start a GSA for some reason, there's some ideas of things that you can put into place to help be an advocate for LGBT students. So we want to start off first with a little, kind of a description of all the acronyms LGBTQIA. This may be something you have never seen before. That's because I created it. There are a lot of things floating around on the internet that tries to kind of work with what these different identities or definitions mean. I tried to simplify it because there's somebody who came into one of my classes who was transgender, and she said that the best way she knew how to explain it is what she is up and down is her personal identity as a human being. And that includes some of the sexuality pieces as part of her personal identity. It's a gender identity, it's eternal, it's not based on what sex you were born as or your romantic attraction to others. Necessarily that could be included, but really is who you are as a person. Do you feel like you are female? Do you feel like you are male in the core of who you are? And it could also include romantic attraction, but that's not the main point. Then the second axis, the red one, is the one that goes horizontal. It's your arms spread out. How do you relate with others in your world? Who are you attracted to spiritually? Who are you attracted to romantically? How do you relate with others? And again, that's an external thing. It's not necessarily based on the sex you were born with or the gender that you came out, the gender marker on your birth certificate. It's just how you relate to others. And then the purple is more of a, we found with working with people in the LGBT community that some people find the definitions of being a lesbian or gay or transgender, that those definitions are really, really important for them because they describe them exactly as who they are and who they want to be and who they want to be perceived as. But there are a number of people that I have met in my work at the university through counseling that really sometimes don't know that they are LGBT quite. They're not quite sure if they are, so they could fit into a category of being queer or questioning. Or there are people who, some people might think I'm LGBT, but I don't personally want to be labeled as that label. They want to just be more, I guess not binary, but more a question mark. Do I need to be put as a label? Do I need to be fit into a box? Do I need to be looked at that way? Can't you just call me by my name? That sort of thing. So queer and questioning kind of is more of that purple kind of, it could include your gender, it could include your romantic attraction to others, it can include a lot of things, but basically it's kind of a, don't box me in. I'm in this community. I am wanting to be identified in this community, but I don't necessarily need a label. There are also some other categories that have come up. We're seeing more people identify as asexual, meaning that they don't necessarily have a romantic, they may have a romantic attraction to others or a spiritual connection, but they may not necessarily engage in the sexual part. Allies, of course, are people who identify as heterosexual and who obviously support the LGBTQIA community. Intersex is when you're born with both sexes. And then these other identities, as we've been working counseling people at the university have come up, there have been more kind of identities that come up like gender fluid or gender flexible, gender queer, gender variant. These are terms that are beginning to be generated and thrown around. And as we were looking up, Dr. Tollerud and I, we were looking up LGBTQIA kind of glossaries to see all the definitions. If you Google that, you'll find so many more definitions in this community about what it means to be identified in this community and a part of this community. And so there are a lot of other definitions, but the one thing I wanted to communicate is that for people in this community, self-identification is key. If you want to know what people are, then they will need to tell you in order for you to know. And so allowing them to self-identify is a really empowering piece and not labeling them right out of the gate. So, as we're seeing, the age of first awareness of gender difference or transgender identity is coming earlier. It's coming in elementary schools. Some people that I've seen videos of some people who are transitioning, they're finding out when they're 2 or 3 years old. They're starting to make the transition in elementary school, going to school as a different gender than what they were born as. And so we're starting to see this in the schools. First awareness of sexual orientation usually happens between 8 and 11 years old. And then age of first identification as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, it says 15 to 17 years old, but I believe that that's probably, from what I've seen, a little bit older. I'm thinking it's happening a little bit earlier, like in the middle schools, that people are, I know of people in the middle school I work in that identify as LGBT. Anybody else have? Yeah. So it's happening earlier, it's happening in the schools. How can we support kids? The next few slides I have are really kind of, I've taken a lot of statistics from the report from the Gay and Lesbian and Straight Education Network, GLSEN. They did an annual report. They do one every couple years. And this is a 2011 National School Climate Survey. It is the latest information, it is what we have. And I just wanted to give you a picture of what it's like to be LGBT in the schools. The first thing is for general education, LGBT issues are really not generally represented in your core curriculum classes. When you get a story problem in math, you definitely don't get, you know, Amy and Jane got married and they had 2 kids and this is their income. You just don't see story problems with that kind of information. You don't see history lessons usually that incorporate LGBT information. It's just not anywhere in the stuff that kids are learning. So if it's not in the stuff that kids are learning, that's one way that they can feel isolated. LGBT books sometimes are not present in the libraries. So if a child wanted to read more about people in their community, or if they're interested in learning more as an ally, they may not have access to those resources. In sexual education, abstinence-only curriculum is prevalent in most schools in the United States. How many schools represented here have abstinence-only curriculum for sex ed? So there's a couple. That sometimes has a heteronormative focus, and LGBT issues sometimes aren't included. So, and it's not even usually even represented in some curriculums. So that can send a message to other students that being LGBT is really not a viable option or an option that's supported, and that can increase, it looks on the statistics, it increases verbal harassment of LGBT students by 10% in the schools if you have an abstinence-only curriculum. And the final part is athletics and PE. LGBT students, because they make it comfortable in locker room situations and gym situations, or on sports teams, they're half as likely to play sports as their peers. Sometimes there's an equal access or an unwelcome environment where it's just the culture of the sports team. They don't want to get involved with the football team, even though they like to play football, because the coach may be biased, or they know some students might be biased and the coach might not say something. So another statistic that was important is over half of LGBT students were bullied in locker rooms or in PE class. We're seeing a lot of avoidance of these classes or avoidance of school because of these classes. This is a picture of harassment in the hallways. There's a lot of verbal harassment, of course, that goes on. "That's so gay" comment is a difficult comment to hear daily over and over and over again in the schools. I think I read one survey where some kid heard it like 17 times in a day as they were walking down the hallways. It's just like, if that's drilled into your head, it can be a negative place emotionally for these children to be. Physical bullying is represented there, as well as cyberbullying. The thing that I wanted to stress is that 60% didn't report harassment because they feared if they did, the situation would not change or it would actually get worse. Some of this is because what has been reported on this report is they can report to a teacher who does nothing, or a teacher who ends up being biased. And so, or they're afraid that no corrective action would even be taken. And so one of the ways to combat this, and we'll talk about this later, is a district-wide training where everyone in your district is trained on LGBT issues and the issues that students face and how you can be supportive and what is expected of all staff, so everyone is on the same page. Academic effects, I'm going to go through this briefly so we can get to some of the answers, but many of you might have seen, some absenteeism in some of your LGBT students, not if this has been an issue for you, or students not coming to school because they're afraid of being bullied. This can result in statistically lower GPAs for these students. They're in class less, of course, they're going to learn a little bit less, or just not feel comfortable in class in the learning environment. And then the biggest statistic, I think, for me is that harassed students are half as likely to pursue post-secondary education than students who are less harassed. So you think of your LGBT students, and the whole purpose of going to high school is that they could be successful in the world beyond, in post-secondary education or a trade school or something, and that they're half as likely to pursue going to some sort of further training is kind of alarming. Finally, I just wanted to address the psychological effects, and this is what we may see the most as counselors. Higher levels of depression, lower levels of self-esteem, and particularly one thing I just really wanted to put out there was that kids who are transgender have a much higher rates of homelessness and much higher rates of suicide. And just a month ago, I wanted to call attention to a trans boy named Taylor Wells in Springfield, Illinois, took his own life. And he was involved in a community group, and he was involved in the LGBT community and getting support, but at the same time, it was so difficult that he took his own life. And this is happening over and over. Dr. Tollerud will speak of Leela Alcorn. Has anybody heard of her story? Yes, it came across the internet, I think it was around December 31st. And it was a teenager who was transitioning, who was born as a male, transitioning to a female, wanted to be called Leela. And she, unfortunately, was pressed into reparative therapy or conversion therapy, where you go to a Christian counselor and you're told to pray the gay away, that if you pray to God, you'll get better. You'll feel like a boy again soon, things like that. So this kind of thing is happening, but I wanted to put a specific attention on suicidality and homelessness, which is really high in the trans community. So Dr. Tollerud is going to speak a little about the mandates, what we're being held accountable for.
Are you getting the picture? Am I on? Are you getting the picture? Okay. We have a big responsibility to this population. I'm not sure how comfortable we all feel in making that kind of transition. Probably you weren't trained in your master's programs to directly deal with this population, but now is the time. Thank you, you're the choir, I'm preaching to you. You're here, and that's the big first step. But being here and taking action can be two different things. And so looking at these statistics and seeing how our young people are being affected, those that are questioning queer, GLBT, are really important to us in our role as counselors. I'm not here to say you have to believe that being GLBT is okay or correct or whatever. That's an individual issue. But I believe what's most important and what I want you to take away today is it doesn't matter what your beliefs are. You have every right to your belief as a professional. But the one thing I will tell you is as a school professional, your responsibility is to keep every student in that school safe. That's the key. And therefore, we have to become knowledgeable, develop our sense of awareness, and learn how to take action to best be able to help these students survive. They are not surviving in some cases. And Taylor Wells, when we said that last week or 2 weeks ago, you can imagine, in Springfield, we actually had couple of people in the audience that had known this person. So it's not far from us. It's all about us. And it can be a student from our school tomorrow who may be facing such hopelessness and such helplessness that they would end up committing suicide. I want to say to you, let's all put our voice together and say, not on our watch. It's time that we all step forward and really take action to help. Now, one thing that really helps us is some legal help. And that's what some of the mandates are about. Unfortunately, or fortunately, making things into law does give us some support and provide some stability and some direction for us on how to deal with it. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about a couple of these. In 1984, there was a statute passed by called the Federal Equal Access Act. And what this did is that it indicated that in secondary schools, you had to provide equal access to extracurricular clubs. Yet as recently as 5 years ago, not far from DeKalb, I was involved in a situation where a school would not allow a GSA organization to form. They went so far as to even think about doing away with every one of their other extracurricular activity clubs to keep a GSA from forming. We had to bring out the ACLU. We got as many people involved as we could because there was such fear that having a GSA group in that school, and it was a rural school district, was somehow going to impact the young people in that school. Thank goodness for this act, because what it does is it provides the right for GSAs to be formed. But just because it's out there doesn't necessarily mean schools are willing to move in that direction. So maybe those of you that don't have GSAs might run into difficulty doing that. And if you do, there are many resources out there. Some of them we're giving you today in your handout. Contact them, get the support you need to provide that for your students. In 2005, there was a court ruling as well. And unfortunately, it takes being sued sometimes for schools to act differently. But in 2005, the Lambda Legal Defense Act got involved with a ruling that said public school systems may be subjective to having to pay damages if they do not provide protection for their students for discrimination and harassment issues. So unfortunately, if we hit schools a little bit in the pocketbook, they begin to pay attention. But for a long time, there was a real turn the other cheek attitude out there. Hopefully, we're seeing some of that go away, because schools are seeing that GLBT parents and children and youth are taking action. They're not settling for status quo, and they're moving ahead and using the law to ensure their rights and their safety. In 2014, an important thing happened. You all know about Title IX, right? That's equal access to, the big thing is athletics, right? Let's face it. That's why we all know it. Girls' sports teams, boys' sports teams. Well, part of that, in 2014, the U.S. Department of Education added to that federal right that protects civil rights, the civil rights protection for transgender students. Now, this is a big one. If you have any transgender kids in your school, it means that they, not me, not the administration, they determine, do I use the boys' restroom or do I use the girls' restroom? Now, whatever they decide, they have to be consistent. Can't change every 3 days in, 3 days out, right? It has to be consistent. But once they decide, then this protects their rights to use the restrooms they wish, to play on sports teams that they wish, to belong to organizations that they wish. And any school that does not follow these rules are subject to losing federal funding.
What about the locker room?
The locker room, yes, an important area. Same idea. If I am transgender and I want to transition to a boy and I'm working on that issue, and I want to play basketball with the boys team, I can go try out with the boys. I have a right to a locker room so long if a locker room is provided for me that is equal in access and facilities. I can be separated, but if not, I'm allowed to use the boys' locker room.
So I've worked a lot with transgender students.
Mm-hmm.
In our district, we've been utilizing the nurse's office. But is that and then we've had no problem with that, no student has had an issue with that. But technically, if they wanted to, are they allowed to be in the locker room if they wanted to be of that?
Yes. You might, again, you might want to get, as
And we have
As
talked legal, and we
right.
addressed.
As Vince said, I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be careful not to get into
But
something I
legally,
don't.
that-
Right,
Technically, they have a right to make that decision.
exactly. On the same, in the same token, using the nurse's office, while it might be really great for me to say, I'm going to use the boys' locker room, I also will want some protection and some
Right,
privacy
and
as
that's
well.
the kind of conversation
Exactly.
that's been had,
Yeah,
is
and that's
where
cool.
it's possible for you to feel comfortable, but, and we haven't had a student be adamant that, no, I really want to be,
Sure.
but if they really wanted to, then that right has to be a policy.
What this is going to lead to, too, I believe, is some opportunities for us to begin to see unisex bathrooms where we're going to have certain bathrooms in the schools, I believe, that are going to be designated male and female.
And that's been in discussion.
One thing, too, I wanted to bring up, I was speaking to a transgender student in the schools and working with dressing out for PE and things like that. They were provided access to a restroom in their schools that was kind of like a staff restroom. Excuse me, I'm getting titty again. When they were provided that, though, staff could easily go in and out of that restroom anytime that they wanted to, and then there was also no place to lock their backpack and their phone and their belongings, because there's lockers in the locker rooms. There's not necessarily lockers in some of those extra other places. So those are things that you want to be sure to think about, is privacy and security, if we do make accommodations for someone that is other than a locker room.
I just want to add that Title IX is really a wonderful mandate that helps support these youngsters, but it is also not law. It's a statute, I believe is what it's called. And what happens with that is it can change depending on the administration. So it is very vulnerable. In 2015, matter of fact, in February, there's a Student Non-Discrimination Act that has been worked up in the federal legislation. Unfortunately, it was put forth in a committee from the House, the U.S. House, and it was not passed. But this is our next legal issue that we believe will be very important, because if it and when it gets passed, it will again prohibit public schools from any kind of discrimination against a student based on their perceived or actual gender expression or student identity. This is a very political issue as well. I don't have to tell you that, you know that. But again, we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of these legal issues because they're so important to making sure that we move forward in providing a safe place for these kids and the services that they need to be who they are. In your handout, you'll see a few pages in, maybe they're numbered. You'll see a page with the ISCA model on the, yes.
I will put a link to the handouts on the website. I do, right now the presentation's on the ISCA website, but I will send them on Monday to Dan.
Or if you want to just give us your email on a piece of paper, we'll be glad to make sure it gets out too. But this is the position statement from the American School Counseling Association on GLBT students. That's really important for you to know. It's been written for a number of years, and it's constantly being reviewed. We urge you to read that and look at that in terms of how that relates to our role as a professional school counselor in the school. And those are some of the key pieces that it exemplifies: promoting policies, being not only political, but also in our role as a counselor, and addressing all the issues we've been talking about, everything from attendance to sports, and helping students to work with developing their own personal identity.
Now that we know what is expected of us as school counselors and the laws, we wanted to talk about where we start. Unfortunately, with this presentation, we're not going to be able to show this video because videos sometimes don't come across all that great. We've been having some technical issues. But I did want to point you to YouTube and TED Talks with Ash Becker. She is an incredible LGBT speaker. She's identifies obviously as lesbian, and she is talking about in this talk being able to kind of be an ally to the LGBT community. However, she has some fantastic talks about that's so gay and how we can eliminate that language from our vocabulary. And she also has another talk about just the coming out, the issues of coming out, and how that's a universal, hard conversation that everybody can identify with. And so she has some incredible resources. I've used her talks a lot. Just as an inspirational source, but I wanted to touch basically on what it means to be an ally for students in schools. And from my point of view, it really comes down to being an advocate. If I know LGBT students are coming to my school, I want to make sure, just like I'm preparing for a party, I want to clean the house, so I want to clean up all those policies that don't fit them or don't protect them. I want to look at all the manuals, make sure that the wording is right, that there's protection for them. And I also want to make some food just specifically for them. I want to make sure that they have books in the library. I want to make sure that they have access to sports teams and access to locker rooms. I want to make sure that they have full range of the school, and I want to make sure that they feel comfortable. Put on the music, right? Get the party going. So we want to make sure that they have like a club, like a GSA, where they can feel supported and protected, but that there's also some diversity education in the classrooms that can help other people know that, hey, these people are a natural part of our diverse community. There's a lot that we can learn from them in history. They are a part of us. You are a part of us in school. Belongingness matters. If a student is able to walk into a school where they feel represented and they see some examples of people in their life, in their curriculum, and in their schools, then it makes a huge difference in their belongingness and willingness to come to a school, and the whole culture of the school, where people know that putting down people of different diversity just isn't tolerated. So as we think of ourselves as school counselors, think about what you can do to become an ally and to change the school into a welcoming, holistic environment for all students. And I believe that you're homonegativity in counselors and how it starts with us.
Go ahead and fill out the
yeah.
slide, please. We take with us our biases, our beliefs, and who we are as counselors. And so for a minute, and when you reflect on this slide, I want you to think about who you are. What are your biases? Where do you need to educate yourselves more about working with this population? Lots of times we talk about homophobia. You all studied that right back in your master's program where you learned about mental health issues. In some regards, though, we're really not talking about homophobic, except in some very severe cases. We really are referring to homonegativity. That idea that it's not that we're homophobic, but it's that we're prejudiced against these people. We just have negative attitudes about that. And so what I want to do is challenge you, because in a study done by Satcher and Leggett with school counselors in 2007, and I just can't wait for this survey to be redone to see how it might change in 10 years. But in this survey, what they found is that high school counselors who had high levels of homonegativity towards students who were gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, they found that the services provided to those students were less than the students who were not gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. Our attitudes make a difference. Now I'm guessing, but in my years of research, I would believe to say that would probably be true with how we might approach students of color, students who are international students, and students who are different than each of us. And we all have to wrestle with that on ourselves in terms of how do I approach other people who are different, and what negative vibes do I have about them, and how do I feel about them? Because what we want to make sure is we're not cutting back on services provided to these students, whether it be for college, whether it be for helping them with our social emotional needs, our academic planning, career planning, whatever happens in that. These counselors are more likely to be reluctant to plan and carry out and promote the welfare of the LGBTQ students. So as you reflect on this slide, think about, where are you at in that? What can you do to decrease any negativity you have in regards to students in your building of all sorts to really be better at serving all of our students effectively?
Mm-hmm. I also think about that slide, and I think about kind of hospitals. If we just had hospitals as just places where people could come and get treated, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, with the LGBT community at all, because there's nothing wrong, there's everything right. But if people just use hospitals as a place to come and get treated, then there would be people out there who wouldn't know, like, the health education, the preventative stuff that could help them be healthy. So the providing programs and awareness and changing the culture of the school is so important, instead of just helping the 1 or 2 kids who come into your office. To really think about changing the culture of the school so that everybody can be aware.
In your handout, you will see that there's a couple of pages in there about the coming out process. How many of you have never seen any information about a coming out stage phase process? Okay. So this really is an important piece to you. The one thing that makes it tough for our GLBTQ kids is that because of the situation they face, we don't accept who they are normally, and so we have to develop ways to help them feel more normalized into the community. And so we talk about how to help them. Well, one of the ways is to know and be able to utilize a coming out process. Okay? The problem with this is that it's not a one-time event. Okay? If you're working with a GLBT kid, coming out is a constant. Now, I'm 68 years old, and I'm going to retire in about 20 days. I'm so happy. But you know what I've been reading is that in healthcare, as people get older and utilize healthcare, they go back in the closet. Because again, coming out in healthcare is another coming out process. How do I come out to the home healthcare worker? How do I come out to the x-ray technician who's treating me at the hospital? Okay. Rochelle started by talking a little bit about how she identifies, and I suppose it's fair that I tell you that I identify as bisexual. That I was married for 19 years, and I have 3 remarkable sons who are all now full adults. And about 24 years ago, after a divorce, I fell in love with a woman. Now, I don't think I was born lesbian on the scale, and by the way, what research tells us is that that's a continuum, not a binary, but a continuum. I think I'm pretty much in the middle of that continuum. Now, I've been very committed to that relationship, a single-sex relationship, for 24 years, but I still call myself bisexual because in some ways I had the ability to choose. That's just part of who I am. It's not a matter of, some people do not have that. Some people will say they are very much at the far end of that spectrum. But in the coming out process, I've had to face many changes in my life, having lived a life as a straight person for many years and then moving into a lesbian relationship. Of my 3 sons, I have one son who is very heterosexual, married a wonderful gal from Brazil. I have a son who is very bisexual, and I have a son who is very gay. Our Thanksgivings are really a delight. When you work with kids who are in the process of coming out, it's not a continuum where you move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. For example, they may be coming out at stage 3 in your school, where they finally have joined the GSA and they're saying, you know what, maybe I belong here. But maybe they haven't come out at all at home. Or what about to grandma? Or what about to the church? And then they finally get up the courage and they're able to do that, but then they go to college. And the process is to start over again. And so it's a constant issue. That's why learning and knowing about the coming out process is a very important piece in our work if we're really going to be able to interact and help therapeutically with these students. Now, those of you that work in a clinic, you might get even more into this, but I think even in the schools, every one of these stages is critical for us to know and to be able to implement. And it really, what I also find is it helps us know where to intervene and how to intervene with those students. Just talk to them. And there's some great questions on here that can kind of identify what the client's issues are when they come in, and then some therapeutic strategies that you as the counselor can utilize in helping them to figure out who they are at that stage.
I also wanted to point out in this slide that even though it says stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that these stages can occur in that order. They can also be recycled, or they can occur out of order. Some kids go all the way through and then go back to stage 2, depending on where they are. And so you just need to kind of understand where students are, or they may be at stage 2 in one area of their life, but stage 5 in another area of their life where they're more comfortable. And so I also wanted to point out that coming out is not something as counselors that we feel like we need to do. It's something that would be their choice. I see a hand in the, yes, and we're going to get to that in the next part of our, slide. So we're gonna skip to that so we have some time to go over some of these things. A lot of my resources I got from GLSEN. That's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. In the back, as some of you got handouts, we were handing out some of the triangle stickers. I might have a few more of those if you want. But even putting a safe space ally sticker in your door is one start. Anything you do is a start. But the more you do, the better you can create a community that is more open, where people can feel like they can have those conversations. If your school does not have a Gay Straight Alliance or an LGBTQ support club, sometimes they go by different names. Different names are okay. I think sometimes in Gay Straight Alliances, some high schools and some other schools have steered away from the use of the GSA or Gay Straight Alliance name because they wanted to create a club that wasn't labeled. Again, that's that kind of going into the queer, the not defined kind of category. So if there's not a support group for LGBTQ students in their schools, do the work to begin to start one, and GLSN has great resources for that online. They also have a safe space kit that you can order online. It's free. They have all those stickers that you can get. Part of the handouts that we handed out were connections with other programs outside of schools. Youth Outlook is big in the Chicago suburbs like Naperville, Aurora. They have several drop-in centers around the Chicagoland area. I know down south they have other support groups for youth, so look for those support groups in your area, because sometimes students may not be as comfortable in a group in your school but may still need the resources, and support groups that are outside of school can do a little bit more. They aren't bound by the school's policies and rules. For instance, the Youth Out group in our area, in the DeKalb area, got involved and helped get a GSA in that school that we were talking about. They were the ones who were able to do the political action. Yeah.
Do you have on their website, do you have local support groups and things like that?
Yes.
Because where my school is, I don't see too much out in the community in terms of resources for my kids to identify.
What's really interesting is that they're there, you just have to look for them. So certainly starting with GLSEN, but for example, at the university, we have Safe Ally, Be a Safe Ally. It just puts something on your door. If you know what you're looking for, that's a tag for students to look for and to go to, because they know that those people have gone through training to work with GLBTQ people. So it's there, but it could be more visible. I'm not going to take that away. I'd like to see it more visible.
I know in Naperville they have an education network that they started doing trainings specifically on how to advocate for and provide resources for transgender students in the schools. So things are starting to pop up as more resources in areas where kids can go. Where are you located? Peoria, so you're a little bit more down.
Started with USA through like last semester.
Okay.
friend, you know.
Okay. If you want to contact me afterwards, I can help locate you with somebody. Okay. We're going to go through the rest of these a little bit more quickly. We talked about LGBTQ books in the library. Starting an LGBTQ book club is helpful. Revising policies. When I talked to students directly about what they wanted, district-wide training for all school staff at every level. If you have a place like Youth Outlook, or they will come and provide that training in your schools. There are other people who will come and provide trainings. You as a counselor can do that too.
And I want to talk to that, pardon me, because as teachers and educators and counselors, we must pave the way for this. We can't step back and say, well, let's let the kids pave the way. It's our responsibility to step up. So to answer the young man's question in the back, I think we have to begin perhaps by forming a task force, working with others on the faculty, perhaps doing a presentation to the school board. Nothing better than the school counselor, social worker, psychologist to be taking the lead in this, to begin to open the dialogue. If you're going to do that, I would strongly encourage including parents in that dialogue. Of course, involving students as you can, but we must take the lead. We must begin to educate our colleagues so that not only is the counseling office safe, right? You're all here. But what about the classroom? What about the coach? What about the locker room? What about other after-school activities? What about dances? All those different pieces are really important to be talked about. So take the lead on this and start by talking with your fellow educators to pave the way for that. Policies, you can develop a policy for your school around this particular population and how you're going to work with that. And certainly not in any way to understand that we have many intersections in our lives. You may be gay or lesbian, but you may also be a minority. You may also be minority from another country who doesn't speak English as their or their first language. People can have all sorts of different issues intersecting, and I think it's just as critical to bring all of those to the table, not just LGBT issues.
On this slide, I wanted to highlight one thing in particular. I talked to a trans student who had been kicked out of their house at the age of 17, and they, of course, there are social emotional issues going on, but the one thing he said that he really wanted is just college and career planning. Where am I going to go from here? How am I going to support myself? And also, he was lacking in life skills. He was like, I don't know how to do laundry. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to do that financial literacy, like doing the checkbook or having a banking account. So be thinking about some of those life skills and some of that extra training that you could provide to kids who are LGBT that might be away from the social emotional learning, but more along the life skills and post-secondary education. Paige, you had a question?
It's a great question. I might seek some support from Lambda Legal on that because she's a minority. I'd wonder too if the administration is just balking at this in order to buy time so that they don't have to deal with it. It's hard to know just what, because it's much more complicated than that, in my opinion. And to work perhaps with some kind of legal help. I mean, Title IX says she should have the right to do that. And I'm suspecting the school has probably sought some kind of legality from their attorneys, but I would contact Lambda Legal. They are really wonderful, they're free, and they'll provide help and assistance around GLBT issues.
I know we have one more question, but we'll need to finish. I encourage any of you who have questions to come up to us. I'll be available afterwards, and you can also email us.
Was there another question?
Yes, there's one more.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with walking a fine line. You know, we have to protect ourselves as professionals, but first and foremost is how do we work with these kids. I would again go back to how do we build an education program, how can we help those parents that are supportive of their children be an influence to those that are on the fence post, using again counselors, social workers, student services to help bridge that. I do want to say one more thing about reparative therapy, and that is there is currently a bill in the House and Senate in the state of Illinois. It is called the Born Perfect Act, and this act is coming from the person that Rochelle talked about earlier on. Her name was Leila Alford, Alcorn. And in December, she stepped in front of a truck and committed suicide because her parents were forcing her to do reparative therapy. She left quite a note, a suicide note, but her parting comments were, "Fix society." And what we have to do is not make this an issue for GLBT kids that are struggling. It really is an issue with society. And we have to let these kids know that we accept them, that their lifestyle or their life choice is just that, a lifestyle and a life choice, and it's who they want to be in the world, and try to, in the best of our ability, to support that. So what that bill would do is it would mandate that no professional counselor can recommend reparative therapy or conversion therapy to someone who is a minor. And if we do, we would stand to lose our license. It's that powerful a bill. So pay attention to that, watch for that, and support it if you can through legislation. I've talked with Dan a number of times, and we expect that to pass. So with that, any parting comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to point to our final resource. They have a lot of free materials at GLSEN, campaigns that they give you everything you need, the curriculum, how to talk to your administrator, how to make changes in your school. If you are looking to make positive change in your school, then you need to visit the GLSEN website and look at some of these campaigns for changing the sports kind of areas, for changing the "that's so gay" comments in the schools. These are excellent resources.
Thank you so much. We hope
Fill
you
out
take
your white
something.
forms. Okay.